Imagine a world where in our education system, we have design as a key component of learning.
Education systems are very slow to adapt to the speed that the world is changing.
Everyone is a philosophical being, but I guess not everybody is a good philosopher. And not everybody is a good designer.
It's not only design is experimentation, but life is an experiment, and we need to reflect. That's why I love talking to Leopold, because he helps me to reflect and to reframe, which is another skill of a designer, our challenges in life and looking at it from different lenses that maybe we don't have all the lenses. We're human. We're not perfect. That's why we need our friends, our community. That's why we need philosophy, I think. So it's a hard thing to teach in cultures where failure isn't accepted and we have to hide our failures. To be a designer, in my view, is to be human.
Welcome to Ideas on Trial. I'm your host, Leopold Ajami, and I have with me my co-host, Ricardo Pinto. Today, we are putting the idea of design on trial with a special focus on human-centered design. And to do that, we have a very special guest to help us explore the role of design and its connection to human character. The undisputed idea we want to explore today is the role of design. Is design merely something you do? Is it about creating solutions? Or is it a mindset? Do we have any responsibility while designing? Does design play a role in our moral character? And should non-designers care about design? So we have so many questions, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Jonathan Steingiesser. Did I say that correctly, Jonathan?
Yeah, that was great. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. So I'm just going to share a quick intro to our audience. So Jonathan is the head of design at Omnipresent, a fully remote startup where he is building a product design team and maturing the practice of product and design in this fast-growing startup. With over 18 years of design experience in startups, retail, tech, nonprofit, mining, government, and education sectors, Jonathan has fostered a passion for design innovation and continuous improvement through operational design and research practices. Jonathan has also advised startups all over the Middle East and in Australia. He is the founder of the Human-Centered Design UAE meetup and was the co-organizer of Service Design Perth and UX Melbourne meetups in Australia. He is also the strategic advisor for many startup accelerators. Wow, Jonathan, that's a huge resume.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about what I do. I think, you're very fortunate when you really enjoy what you do. It's not a job. So it's not, as you can see, it's not just something I do in the 9 to 5. It's also building communities and sharing and growing is something I've done outside of work. And I'm a life learner. I think we're always, we're going to be learning by both teaching, by sharing, and by listening as well, right? So yeah, that's why there's a lot probably there. It's hard to summarize it as well. And I think one little thing, which is always, I'm not sure how to mention, is it's just very proud and very humbled and lucky to have a beautiful wife and 2 young daughters that have changed me as well as a designer. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
And I love that. I love that you mentioned your passion and how design is changing you. And I want to explore that. I want to start with that to dig deeper into why you're so passionate about design. Like, I know you, we met a couple of times. We have so many, fruitful conversations. And you're always, even I attended some of your sessions for the human-centered community. You're so passionate about design. Why?
I think to some of the questions you asked in the beginning, to be a designer, in my view, is to be human. I don't think that you have designers and non-designers. I think many people like myself that come into design or have the awareness that there is a methodology or some sort of a framework often speak to me about, oh, I read the book and it's kind of like I already knew it, but I just didn't know what it was called. And different people in different walks of life, they could be lawyers or artists or anything. It's really interesting. I've mentored a lot of people too. That was probably too much to put into the intro. And the same thing happened to me. I think, for example, I studied at university supply chain management. And I didn't know supply chain management is actually journey mapping or service design back then. It was maybe, I think, not 10 years later, but at least 7 or 8 years later that I was in a workshop doing usability testing in Sydney with the guy who invented usability testing. I was lucky enough, Jacob Nielsen, to be in his 3-day intensive workshop. And I was kind of walked away from that was like in 2008, 2009, kind of like born again, like, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my life. It was just clear to me. But again, to the point, like I'm saying, I think it's to be human, to be thinking about who ultimately are going to be using the services, the systems, the components, the digital artifact of whatever it is that we create, and in bringing them into the conversation and not just making assumptions on what they need. So I think like that, both science and art part is what really compelled me. And really since that day, I just had the clarity of this is the tip of the iceberg of what is design. And design has evolved, right? It is relatively a new discipline. So I think you need to be on your toes. So I guess that's where the passion comes in. It's something that I've grown with. And to your point, it was only when we chatted about maybe I've seen that affect me as well, as a human. And I never really thought about that until you kind of put that, perspective in my thoughts.
I love that. Yes, Ricardo.
That's very interesting. And I think it relates to what we do or how we perceive ourselves at Nobel Philosophy Academy, because you say that there is no real distinction between designers and non-designers. And one thing that we argue here is that everybody also thinks philosophically in one way or another, whether they like it or not. So there is no real distinction between philosophers and non-philosophers. Everyone is a philosophical being. But I guess not everybody is a good philosopher. And not everybody is a good designer. I wouldn't consider myself a good designer.
I agree with you.
And in our conversations in preparation, you make a big deal about human-centered design. And that sounds very interesting. So do you want to tell us a bit of what you mean by human-centered design? And how is that different from other, you could say, approaches to design?
Yeah, sure. And I think we need to, before kind of getting to the core of your answer, I think setting the context is important. And as I mentioned, this is an evolving discipline that is very quickly evolving and changing. It's not like, I don't know, medicine, right? In terms of the centuries that it's been around, or even, I don't know, psychology, for example. I mean, or philosophy, right? Goes back, I'm not the expert, but probably millennia in terms of, the human experience. And like we said, yes, this has been called different things. And I mean, it's interesting in Australia, for example, where I spent most of my life, I've met and I've organized meetups with incredible native, indigenous Australians who talk about the service design mindset of these communities that have been around for 40,000 years. And that design isn't something new. We coin it in, let's say, the Western world as something new. So at the same time, while it has existed in different permeations in different cultures, what we call, let's say, human-centered design today wasn't called that even 10 years ago, right? You had UX, so user experience. And I think it is important to talk about the words, because the words are the core of what we mean. Words matter. And the meetup that Leopold mentioned that I created back in 2013 originally was called UX Abu Dhabi. This is myself and 2 colleagues in a coffee shop. And only upon my return to the Emirates, I saw and I thought about, and I kept, being a part of this community, even remotely, and I found speakers. I kept the community alive, even though there weren't frequent meetings. And I thought it's no longer UX UAE, which is what the name changed after Abu Dhabi very quickly, because I saw that I wanted to, find a larger audience. It's really human-centered design, which covers, I guess it's an umbrella to cover not just UX or UI, but also cover things like service design, interaction design. But instead of labeling with any existing organizations, I wanted to create something independent and my own, just to give back, a non-for-profit. And I felt it was fitting, and as Leopold mentioned, in Melbourne and in Perth, I was involved with other different organizations. And that challenge came about when you organize a meetup or a community. Is it service design? Is it UX? Is it UI? Interact? What is it? And I think it's also a challenge, because by letting go of the term UX, design applies to everything. If you look for a job, for example, for design, you could be a builder, you could be a landscape designer, you could be an artist, an interior designer. I think it's almost not a great word, because it means everything to everyone. And I guess within the community of design, let's say, it's not necessarily mainstream, but human-centered design does talk about that methodology of understanding. And it starts with, if you look up, like a definition, there isn't one known definition. Again, that's the challenge, because it's an evolving industry. It's not like other disciplines. What is a psychologist? What is a philosopher? You've got an acceptable human definition that more or less people agree with. What is strategy? Whereas what is human-centered design? There isn't one thing, but generally it can be agreed upon that it starts with the people you're designing for and ends with solutions or services or digital products that meet their needs. So that's,
I want to stop you there, Jonathan, because
Sure.
that's very interesting, and it relates back to what we do. So we're obsessed about philosophy, and when we're preparing for this session, we're saying, this is amazing. Philosophy and the human-centered design and design thinking, all of these for us are, they have one purpose, which is to serve human beings, right? To be centered towards a human being. And you said that design is to be human. That's a very well put. So, but to me, if I'm thinking about human-centered, so I'm always concerned about this individual, and then later this community and this society. From your experience, how much do you think design has a role when it comes to self-responsibility and, I would say, social responsibility? Or what kind of effect have design on the whole political sphere or societal sphere?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's certainly, I think, amongst the vast majority of let's say the human-centered design, or the people who work with products or services, there is definitely that inherent trait to care about society, about the social impact of what we're doing. And yes, there are organizations, we don't need to get into that, or we can later, that have designers who are doing, what's called dark patterns, or are doing manipulative design, right? Or psychologically affecting people in the gaming industry, in the social media industry, gambling, etc. But that definitely tarnishes a designer in terms of their career prospects. And it's definitely something that hiring managers, for example, are aware of, perhaps more than other industries, I feel, in that you still have a choice. Now, sometimes in life, you may have little choice depending on who you are or your station, and it's not fair to judge others. However, if the kind of organization you work for and the kind of design you do does impact who you are. And there is, especially, I guess, in all markets, there's a large movement, and I was very much involved in that in Australia as a consultant, working with the UN sustainability goals, for example, around social impact of design. And there are a lot of designers who are choosing the impact over the salary. They would rather have less salary, but actually have meaningful work, not just with the kind necessarily doing social impact work, but being a part of organizations where they buy into the ethics and the values. And that is something that I have always thought about. But again, as I said, it's not always easy. You might find yourself in a small town that only has a bank and maybe a huge gambling startup, for example, and you don't maybe have a choice because you've got, your family to provide for. So again, there's no judgment here. I'm just saying that it is something that is growing in awareness. And I think that's beyond even people within design, right? The care for the environment is definitely something that's growing in the human mindset, I feel.
Yeah. I can see you want to jump in, Ricardo. I just want to say thank you, Jonathan, for sharing with me this speech of Mike Montero, How Designers Destroyed the World. And I think that was fantastic. I unfortunately never heard of him, but now I'm going to buy his books. But he says something to what you're saying now. He said, as a designer, if I remember well, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, as a designer, we have the choice. We can choose what to do and what not to do. And that's a very important decision, to choose what not to do. Because at the end of the day, we have a responsibility, whether the impact is big or small. And I'm assuming, and he didn't maybe say it this way, but I'm assuming also we have a responsibility towards ourselves, right? And this is where I want to bring back the discussion to asking you, how did design affected you as a person, affected your values, affected the way you treat other people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think by doing the work, and if you think of design, I lean towards the research side of design. So the beginning of the process of design. And I really studied that area hard. And I went even, in the recent part of my career into design management and strategic design as well, and looking more broadly, more holistically, and also translating design into business and impact. And by focusing on the research side, you do a lot of talking to humans. You do a lot of one-on-one interviews, ethnographic research, just observation, usability testing in many different countries and different people with fascinating, outcomes. Like a quick example for the region, I did at NYU Abu Dhabi the first Arabic website. I didn't design the website. I did the research to understand what are the needs of students, parents, third parties, and then create a mini site based on those needs. And then obviously worked with the people who developed it and brought it to life. But just speaking to people, you really work on that empathy muscle. And you obviously, naturally, I think it's human to apply that to your life. So to think about not just your needs, but others' needs, and to sometimes maybe even go too far with that. So an example is my children. I think I sometimes maybe go too far and I need to step away. The child will never say to you at a young age, you're spending too much time with me, you should have a break, you should go do some exercise, you should go out on a date with mommy. A young child won't say that. But by you sometimes going too far with, it also can be maybe too much or unhealthy. I think it's knowing what that balance is. And that's, philosophically something we all strive for, right? Is a balance in life. So I guess it does, I think it's also like, on the one hand, it's a blessing, but I also want to talk about the curse, because us designers in every company I've worked in, everything we see, we look at with the eye of design and we try to fix everything. And it can be really frustrating because the world's broken and processes are broken, people are broken, systems, everything's broken. And when you're constantly looking at it, it can be tiring, exhausting. We talk about it, like there's banter amongst designers, but also sometimes like not everything needs to be fixed. Like just accept it for what it is. It might be a mess or chaos. That's okay. I think it can be a little bit of a curse to do too much of that empathy. And again, we need to find a balance.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Yeah, I really like the last thing you said, that not everything needs to be fixed. And I wish that that kind of principle would guide not only design but everything we do. One of the things that Leopold
Actually,
and I,
us.
yeah, complain about philosophy is that, especially academic formal philosophy today, is that it often starts not by building this empathic muscle that you talk about, by talking to people, but seeing their problems, or even your own problems, but by wondering whether, I don't know, whether reality is conscious, whether you can think before you are, questions that are not really based on people's
Daily
problems,
life.
on reality, yeah, on real life. So I guess my question is, in the details, how are you aware of moral questions of people needs specifically in the work you do, in the sense of how do their needs affect the concretes of the design?
I think that's one large misconception, right? In, let's say, people maybe newer to design or who don't necessarily practice. And that's one of the number one things, or whatever, the top five, that is my job to teach and mentor my teams, but also the rest of the business. There's an idea that we ask people, what do they want? What do they need? Or we, just observe their struggle and we fix things. I think it's a lot of it is to do with people don't know what they need or what they want a lot of the time. And our job as designers or philosophers is to observe the current state. Nothing's new under the sun, even if we're creating something revolutionary. How are people solving the problem today? And through observation and finding enough patterns and combining quantitative data with these deep, ethnographic or interviews, the qualitative side, to minimize the risk of creating something that they don't need. So through observation, to understand where the pain is, where the unmet need is, but also where the opportunity is. And sometimes it does require that leap, right, to create something. So a quick example, just to make it tangible, is the iPhone, right, which is a well-known. If you ask people what they needed at the time, they would have said, I want a phone that I can take pictures with, or I want a camera that I can call with. But they didn't say, I want this laptop, I want a communication device on the palm of my hand. It took someone observing and understanding to take that leap. And it's the same in the work that I do. And something I teach is that you never, like, it's, the golden rule is never ask someone what do they want or how much they would pay for it. They'll say, yeah, I want it and I'd pay a fortune. But when it comes to it, they won't, because there's that say-do gap. So we need to observe what they're doing and also insert our own vision and whatever that, that company vision is, and the reality of technology. There's those three parts: the business, the technology, and the human, right? The user need, and come up with what that minimum viable product or minimum viable design looks like in order to improve their lives or create a better world, let's say.
That's inspiring, because again, I can see a very interesting connection with what we do as philosophy. And I would say three things, and correct me if I'm wrong. The first one is the power of observation of the real world, the physical world, right? And the second thing is the observation of humans and human needs. And the third thing is considering the consequence of what you create, right? And I find these fascinating and, annoying sometimes, and again, in academic philosophy, because so many philosophers ignore the physical reality and ignore the importance of human needs, and maybe just focus on the effect on the society. But what you're talking about now is so interesting, because it gives us a way to consider that if we want a better guidance in our lives, because that's what philosophy is all about. If we want a better guidance in our lives, we have to think like designers. We have to look at reality. We have to look at human beings, their needs, their values, and ours as well, and then think about the effect in the world. Would you agree with that? Or do you see the connection? What's your thought there?
Definitely. I think there is a huge parallel between what you said and designers and maybe non-designers in businesses who think they have the answers and want to jump straight into the future state, or let's call that the academic philosophy of not dealing with the real world. So they make massive assumptions that internally within the business, we're the smartest, we're the greatest. A lot of ego obviously is usually involved there, and jump straight into delivering what they believe will bring success or bring money without understanding and rooting what you're doing in the current state. And that's what design brings. It's quite simple, right? There's a current state, there's a future state, and there are journeys, and we can look at what those journeys should be based on the pain that exists today or the opportunity that exists today, not just based on either some theory or what we assume.
Yeah. And you can see the effect on people. I mean, one of the things when I first met you, I said to myself, this is someone who's genuinely interested about people. Like it's not like, and you don't see that often. Now, I don't know if that's, I'm sure design has a role in this, but that doesn't mean every designer has that, a genuine approach with people. There's upraising, there's, your own value system and all of that. But it's interesting because very few people who are designers are interested in design and this whole human-centered approach in their lives. And I love that when I met you, that was one of the things that made me say, this is a person I can befriend, right? And do you find that with the people you work with or clients?
I do agree. I'm not your average designer. I think a lot of designers, and both in these Australia and here in the UAE, the teams I've worked with are multinational, multiracial, multi-religion, right? There's no, even in Australia, the kind of organizations I've been with are, and Australia in general, is quite diverse and multicultural. And there are a lot of introverts. So I'm not your typical designer. I'm definitely an imposter, let's say. I've faked it till I made it. I think that's a life philosophy. And I still, it still works today. And even in like public speaking, which you've seen me do probably pretty well, I came from doing that terribly, in high school, for example.
We all have.
And having read cards and choking and failing. I think it's the failing that we find our style and we find what works. But I think perhaps that is that upbringing of living in many different countries and in different places. I do enjoy people. Like you could say, I am a people person, and I enjoy meeting new people, and just, again, and that's that researcher side. Before I knew that that's what I wanted to do, it's that kind of sixth sense of just feeling the energy of people. So it's not only what can be seen or what is tangible, it's also like maybe that academic philosophy or what can't be seen and what can't be explained through human words sometimes. It's just an energy that you feel. And it's interesting, even with the digital world of the world being on Zoom, and now I work in a fully remote company, it's great that you can still there is some energy, I feel, that you can feel a person, even if we're talking like this, right, as opposed to being in the room. Obviously, ideally, like we are, but I'm happy that, we can still have that, that feeling.
My impression is that you place a lot of value on experimentation, if I'm not mistaken. You just talk about not working from mere theories, but talking to people and also learning from failure. So how much value do you place in experimentation for design themes?
Yeah, that's a mindset, I think, that again is not a simple one to teach or to accept. I think depending on, again, to Leopold's point earlier, where we grow up and the culture, and I have studied this, and different cultures have different methods of teaching. Failure is not accepted. So it's a hard thing to teach in my teams and to mentor and to coach individuals that grow up in cultures where failure isn't accepted, and we have to hide our failures. We don't bring them in the open and study them and have retrospectives and say what worked, what didn't, how can I improve? That makes it much more challenging. And I think it's not only design is experimentation, but like life is an experiment, and we need to reflect. That's why I love talking to Leopold, because he helps me to reflect and to reframe, which is another skill of a designer, our challenges in life, and looking at it from different lenses that maybe we don't have all the lenses. We're human, we're not perfect. That's why we need our friends, our community. That's why we need philosophy. I think I definitely need to read more philosophy, or start reading philosophy, not more, because I haven't read anything on philosophy. But to your point, it is something I think that is not just for individuals, but for teams. It's not that easy to learn through failure and to pivot. But that is like 101 of not just design, but startup and product philosophy of how do we understand that need, as we spoke about. We release something into the wild, and it's not always about doing the research up front. Sometimes we just need to release something and observe what happens and pivot accordingly. And it's that constant pivoting and that experimenting that will lead us to the ideal outcome. It's not always putting it and doing so much research, so much philosophy, if you will, without bringing it to the real world, because that's waste. Unless we deliver value to the human, then they're not going to see all of that research or all of that. And that's a tricky thing to teach too, right? Because we need to understand what is the right thing to do at the right time. And there is no perfect formula of right thing at right time. It depends on the designer or the philosopher, what methodology or what framework you use and what tooling, when and how. And it's also the beautiful thing of design is that it's both art and science.
Yeah.
And I am very careful in my teams to allow the art to take place and not be prescriptive of it's got to be like this, because it's not a science. It's not ones and zeros.
Yeah, that's I think is a very important thing, because we tend sometimes to separate the art and design, specifically when it comes to design. So we separate the art and the science. And I don't think that's a good strategy. I think they are harmonious. Okay, Jonathan, you're putting a team. Go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So you're putting a team together now with Omnipresent, and I'm interested to know, like, what would be the one value that you would never sacrifice? Like the one value you want to see in your team, that if they don't have it, or in one of the individuals, if they don't have it, you're going to say, no.
It's so hard to say one. Can I say two?
Okay, go ahead.
But look, the number one is definitely what attracted me to this organization, which is a new concept, right? An organization without a building, an organization without a country. It's like a John Lennon song, right? No religion too. From inception, no building, no country. There's two co-CEOs. One is British, one is Austrian. Both at the time were living in London. Now, one has relocated here to Dubai. But they thought long and hard, and I heard it from them in my first week. I happened to be in London at sharing the values. And I'm very much aligned with those values for a long time. And the number one for the designers is the same as the organization, is humility. If we have all the answers, then there's nothing for you to learn. There's nothing for me to teach you. If all that exists is, confidence and arrogance and perfection, then you don't fit into my style or the team that I'm looking to build. My philosophy is very much about a family, a community, and building communities, building families. I treat the teams that I build like my own family, and I deeply care about them. And I think if we have the humility and the community and the village and the family, we can do anything. It doesn't matter if it's this company or that company, and we will go anywhere, and that will keep us strong and together. And our success will be shared. And that's not an easy thing to teach. It's not I, it's we. What did the product design or the design team do? And we will help and support each other. And if someone has too much work, then the person who doesn't have enough will share. And that's a constant thing that you need to live and breathe, right? And the second one is very much curiosity, which again is a company value, which I'm very much aligned with. And I think that curiosity is what pushes the boundaries, right? We can mix curiosity with ambition, although it's another value, but curiosity is what's going to push the envelope further, to not settle for the status quo. Like going back to some of your original questions, my view on design is that it's very much like I saw another video I should share with you is on Nordic service design. The Scandinavians are very, very advanced in this world because it's not a new concept to them. It's a concept that their societies have had for years. Especially the Finnish people, for example, are very unique, but also the others. Something like the Japanese. If there's a natural disaster, people will stand in a long line and no one will cut the line. Imagine a natural disaster, Leopold, in our region. I'm not going to name a country, right?
Oh,
imagine driving to work in our region. It's the opposite of that, right? But the concept in these societies, and then when they practice design and service design, it's really amazing. And I have to, share with you and your listeners this video. But back to the point is that when I think of design inside of an organization, I don't think that you should have a design. I think it starts with a design team, sure. But I think ultimately it's about everyone. And this is what they say in this Nordic video, which I totally agreed with before I even watched it. Everyone, again, is human, should be practicing this mindset. And sometimes, back to our point, I didn't raise this when both of you mentioned it earlier, but yes, you need the awareness. You need to flick the switch. So yes, everyone's a philosopher. Some are good, some are bad, but regardless of, obviously the good ones have the switch flicked on, but it's the same with design. It's as if, and I'm sure the two of you can appreciate this, you walk through life and you're like, how are the rest of these people just not aware of this thing? And sometimes you can't explain it in English, in Spanish, in any language. They just don't get it. And some people, it's frustrating because you're like, this thing is amazing and it's going to help you. I'm trying to help you. But they are just not attuned to it. So yes, they have the ability, the human ability to learn anything. But yes, some people are more attuned to it than others. And I think design and philosophy has that in common. So to just close the loop on the business, I think there should be people in different departments that are designers or are practicing design. They don't necessarily need to be called designers or have that label. And eventually, ideally, everybody should be thinking this way and aligning. But we're human, we're complex, we have egos, we build empires. So, and if it was so easy, then what would we do, right? It'd be a boring world. So, but I do think that that's the future. That's the human evolution, for people to just understand that concept of design and be practicing that regardless what they do. They don't have to be the one speaking, doing the research or the design, let's say.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, for example, you imagine a world where in our education system, we have design as a key component of learning, regardless which aspect of design, but thinking like a designer with all that curiosity and the passion to build the world in their image is something very important, right?
And you raise an excellent point. That's really missing in all countries. And academia and governments and non-government education systems are very slow to adapt to the speed that the world is changing. And I'm seeing that with my own, daughters, for example, but I also, especially, in the countries I've lived in Australia and here in the UAE, universities don't teach this. And those that do, don't teach it the right way, in my view. It's still like a structured methodology that you do A, then B, then C, and then you have your cake. That's not teaching design. It needs to start from zero, basically, right? And from kindergarten and teaching these concepts. You don't even have to call it design or philosophy for that matter, right? Like, we don't teach philosophy either. It's only done, like maybe at a master level, it's taught well, but at a undergraduate or even at a high school or primary school level, it's practically non-existent.
Wow.
Even though you might have pocket, but it's not mainstream for sure. There's people doing great work, don't get me wrong, and it's slowly getting there. but not at the speed of what's needed by the society just to make a better world, never mind to, improve organizations or companies.
If design is built up slowly, think about philosophy now. How many years we need to inject philosophy in high school?
And I think there's a connection. And I wonder, what do you think are the causes of that? You already mentioned anti-failure culture. And I think that's true, and that it takes a lot of honesty and courage to say, I messed up. But if there is one thing that people could do to start from zero, start from scratch, and develop this mindset, what do you think that would be? Or if there is one belief that they could challenge, which one would it be?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I think again, no. So again, I think that the challenge is often from a cultural perspective. It's creating the ability to ask why. So I'll talk a little bit about myself. I was born in Israel. I'm Jewish, and part of the Jewish religion is always asking why. There are books and books after the Old Testament of just, religious, like not just rabbis, but famous people in arguing and debating on an understanding of a law or a commandment or an interpretation of an event. And that culture of always challenging and asking why is healthy, in my opinion, because by asking why, by challenging and debating, that's when we recognize our frailty, that we're human, that we've failed. And that's when we can also admit that we've made mistakes or we've gone down a wrong path. And I'm not saying this is unique, right, to Judaism. I think some of these are human and are universal traits. I'm just telling you what the belief system, the upbringing that I had. And going to answer your question, if there's one thing, I think...
Before you go there, I want to say that's an amazing insight, because when you thought about the learning, even when you're thinking about your religion, you thought about something very scientific or very practical, which is asking why. And I love that, which means, and that's why I talked about the upbringing. How valuable is it to be raised on non-dogmatic approach? And that's what I'm sensing here, that you're thinking about asking questions. And, we don't see that often, right? Specifically when we're young. And then you're bringing that you're asking why. And I love that. So sorry I cut you, but I want to point out that...
No, that's okay.
That's what makes you a designer. It's part of design,
right? The 5 whys
exactly.
is a technique to research, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can annoy people when we keep asking why, but we actually make them think, which is what I love about Leopold. He makes me think. He unlocks sometimes and we don't often are made to think or even think. If you ask someone in an interview to describe a situation and you say, why did you do it? They might tell you. But then if you ask why again, you're making them think. And that's when you get the greatest insight. They don't even realize themselves why they did it. But when you get to that why, and that's a hard thing, again, to teach, because people often stick to a script of the interview of asking the questions. Yeah. But knowing when to ask why and when to dig deeper, and sometimes it's not why, it's just asking the question that you're trying to get unlock, right? But so back to closing the loop, to answer your question, the first thing that came to my mind, Ricardo, was the moment that the penny dropped for me with why usability testing in that course is what I want to do with my life. Because usability testing is when you ask someone, if those of your listeners don't know, to complete certain tasks on a website or on a product or an app or anything. It could be a service, right? But for the argument's sake, it's a website and you're asking someone, how would you go about buying this product on Amazon? And you observe what they do. You don't tell them how to do it. But if you get 5 people to do this, that's a representation of a much larger group. And the penny fell for me. And what I love about usability testing is that it's more science than the art. You can take a business owner or any non-designers, show them their customer struggling with their product or service, and the penny drops for them, and they go, wow, that's amazing. And they think they know everything. They've been running this small shop, this supermarket, their whole lives, and they're the third generation. But you bring in their customers, show them struggling with the website that they've created to buy food, whatever, and they will listen to you. They will understand it because you're bringing data, you're bringing their customer. So I think, I don't know what that translates to for a young person, for example, right? But I think if we translate the aha moment, that wow, that's design. That's the power of empathizing with the person you're trying to create the thing for. Anyway, that's what came to mind. I don't know if it's the great answer.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's creativity in art, design, science, philosophy. Yes. And to add to both of your points about the why, I think it's also important to ask it to yourself. And your recent example shows that. Because we usually think about, okay, asking why, ask why always to other people, to your teacher, to your priest, to your mom and dad. But also ask it to yourself, because we come with assumptions. We come with certain preconceived beliefs that will often impede us from, that empirical observational habit that we need to come up with not only the solution, but the very questions that we need to be raising at this moment, which is a great task.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. Just a final point. And again, I know I keep talking about how much I love Leopold, but
I love too.
what he helped me to do, and I guess the challenge of this transition of life that I'm in, which is working in person in an office every day, 9 to 5 or whatever, to being remote, is having less time to ask the why, to reflect, to have those water cooler chats, to have that support network. And it's something that I'm very aware of right now. And I'm finding the balance of not just the right, friends, but that right frame of mind or the right time. And it's not even other people, right? Like to your point, Ricardo, it's also about us asking why and having me time by ourselves, doing sport or doing whatever that makes you happy, doing something for yourself and prioritizing yourself in the human. It's not selfish to look after yourself. It's really important. And I think this is something I'm far more, aware of, and something that I am working on. And it's obviously a lifelong, project, but I think it's something that all of us should work on. It's finding not just the other humans in the human-centered design, but this human, like yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's so powerful. Jonathan, I personally won't get enough of you. What do you think, Ricardo? This can stay for like hours. But I want to thank you so much. And before we close, I want to make a connection for what you said about usability testing, because I find that fascinating and maybe our audience can use it. So go back and listen to how Jonathan described it. And then think about what it means to your life. And I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is when he was talking about it, I saw that this can inspire us to raise our children. Instead of telling your child what to do, observe him or her, what they're doing, how they're tying their shoes, how they're reading their books, and then you can teach them the method. But first observe them. So I love that insight, and it's adaptable to anything else. If you're reading a book, don't ask people about it. Don't go YouTube, what is it about? No, just read it first. Go inside the mess, and then later on you can talk to people. So I love that. Any last word, Jonathan?
I've really enjoyed it. I want to do it again. It's been the best podcast. And I think, just the last word for your listeners, I want to share with you. So I have only written one Medium article, and I've got in that Medium article, and I would love, I guess, us to reframe this Medium article about lean usability testing and how to go about it. And I've got in there, I give for free, some templates. It'd be great to turn that into something philosophy related or life related. I'd love your interpretation on it, and happy to share that, with your listeners.
Absolutely. And actually, we'll also put a link to your meetup group so people can join in. And I know that you do a lot of things on ground, but also live and on Zoom. So I strongly recommend.
It'd be great. Yeah.
I'll put everything in the show.
One final thought that I forgot to mention. There is an amazing Australian designer, which again, I just want to share this. And I was blown away by this. This also affected me and changed my mindset. I went to a conference a very small conference in Perth, Western Australia, where I did a talk myself. It was nice. I haven't done many talks in conferences, hopefully in the future. And there was one other guy, an amazing designer who I'm still in good contact with, even though I'm over here, who did a talk about a book called Design Your Life. And there have been a few different books like this, but this was a designer who also designed the book and it's not just like a lot of text, there's fonts and there's larger. And next time we meet, I want to show you this book. I bought this book, Leopold, and it was amazing to hear this. It wasn't just the book, right? I heard, before I even read the book, this designer talk about how he had read the book and how he himself changed his life by reading the book called Design Your Life. And we are designers, but very seldom do we apply design to designing our life. It's the same as myself, right? I mentor and I coach and I create strategies for other people for their careers. But very seldom, if not rarely, do I do that for myself or for, I don't know, my spouse or in non-areas of design. To your point, we can apply these things to everything in life. Why don't we?
Yeah, that's worthy of another episode, actually. But that's so inspiring. That's so inspiring and so true. And I would say, Jonathan, I don't know if Ricardo, you have something on that. I would say we forget, and all we need is sometimes someone to remind us. That someone can be our spouse or a coach or a friend or just a stranger or just an object sometimes. Right? We get inspired by an object and it reminds us to apply them to our lives. Would you agree, Ricardo?
Yeah, totally.
All right.
I'm never gonna conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I want to thank you, Jonathan, because this is the first episode that we record in one shot.
Absolutely.
You've made our lives easier.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. It's been a huge pleasure, and I'd love to do it again, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you, Jonathan. Talk soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.